Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. We continue to break down and analyze and work our way through the BC provincial election that never ends. Although sort of ended, we're down to 2 judicial recounts now. We don't think that's going to change much. And in the last week since our last show, we now have an NDP majority government by 1 seat, thanks to a recount and final count in Surrey Guildford, and a reversal of that seat by 27 votes for the NDP's Gary Begg. So, a majority government for the NDP. It's one of the topics we will be discussing this week. We're going to bring the panel in to break all of this down. Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver, Allie Blades are here. The Pod Squad is going to take us through what is happening now. So, we'll start with you, Allie. We have a 47-seat NDP majority. It's technically 1 seat. Is this a workable parliament? Is it a workable majority? On paper it is, but what's your view of what's about to happen here for the NDP?
You're absolutely right. On paper it is. It's the bare minimum of what a party could have aimed for in order to govern, and congratulations to the NDP for that. I think it works. I think, last week we were talking about, would we potentially go into an early election? This is one of those milestones that we probably won't, which means that we're in this governance cycle for the next 4 years. What this means for some of the other parties, though, is kind of exciting. It means that the Conservatives, being a brand new party, can take some time to build infrastructure and to build a policy and to really gear up for the next election. What it means for the Greens, it's the same, that they were kind of written off in this election, that potentially they wouldn't get any seats at all. And congratulations to them. They got the 2 with the leader in Sonia. So this bench strength of 3 people who are out there, who can be out there for the next 4 years building the party as well. So this means we're going into it for 4 years.
Do we think we're going to last 4 years on this? It's possible. There's retirements and resignations, and people get sick, and people move on, and we could have by-elections. I guess it's more likely. Your point is, it's more likely that this lasts 4 years than previously when we had the minority NDP government, and that was never gonna last very long at all. So I think that's what you're saying, right?
This is stability. And that's good for policy. That's good for voters. And it means that I don't doubt that it's going to be an exciting 4 years, because it's a massive opposition on the other side. And we've kind of been lacking that. That was the criticism of BC United before, that their opposition wasn't as good as what people had thought with leader Kevin Balkin. And so this is a massive opposition. I think it's going to be an exciting legislature to watch.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, let's bring you in. NDP majority, mission accomplished banner. What's your take?
I think it's significant that the NDP is forming a second in a row majority government. It's something that incumbent governments in Canada have been largely unable to do outside of Saskatchewan, which seems like it's going to have the Saskatchewan party forever. I think it's absolutely not a situation where you do a mission accomplished banner. There was a strong message sent to the NDP, particularly by working class and middle class voters in swing seats, that folks are unhappy with the pace of action and change, particularly on issues of healthcare, affordability, housing, and public safety. And so in as much as the NDP can take a deep sigh of relief in that they held on, if they're going to succeed in this parliament, if they're going to have a chance to win in this next election, they're going to need to recalibrate. They're going to need to recalibrate fast. They're going to need to govern with a sense of urgency. bring forward tangible, real action that makes a difference in people's lives, not 16-point comprehensive plans for a strategic framework, but tolls off bridges, MSP premiums canceled, that sort of politics. And they need to set priorities. They've been over 22 months of David Eby. They did a lot of good things, but one thing that they could have done an awful lot better was to hone in on 2 or 3 things that mattered really to voters and just attack those relentlessly and show progress on all of those and communicate progress on all of those things. So it's a win. They're happy, but there's a message that's been sent, and they need to do better, and they need to act fast and do it now, or else their wobbles that they felt in the election will become a slip, and that is not good for them.
Jillian, those I agree with Jeff there, but those are hard things to produce visible results on. Affordability, housing. I mean, no one can argue David Eby didn't produce an incredible amount of housing reforms. He focused on that in such a way I don't think we've ever seen before. And Adrian Dix did a lot in healthcare, but it hasn't produced the results. So how hard is it going to be for the NDP to do what Jeff just said there and show kind of visible, tangible results for people?
Well, yeah, I think on those fronts, it's definitely time to focus on implementation. There's a phrase I've heard talking about Democrats in the States that they love a wedding, but they don't know how to make a marriage work. And I think you kind of see the same thing in Canada with like center left parties where, you know, and I mean, really any party, they love a ribbon cutting, they love an announcement. But when it comes to implementation, it's just not as sexy. So I think it really is getting down to business and making sure that those things really yield results and that you're really shepherding them and seeing them through. And I also think there's another element where the NDP has sort of shifted from 2017 when they first formed government from sort of a more populist focus where they were running on things that were really tangible, like $15 minimum wage, $10 a day daycare, to a much more kind of like, you know, bureaucratic, nitpicky sort of management after all of those things kind of got off the ground. And I think sort of in terms of new initiatives, going back to that sort of thinking that really appeals to a lot of people, that's really clear and really has an impact is sort of where they need to go in terms of going back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm. Steal a few pages from the John Horgan NDP and a little bit less of the David Eby NDP maybe to sort of recalibrate that ship. Jillian, staying with you, the Greens. Let's just talk about the Greens. We'll go around on this because for a moment in the minority government scenario, the Greens had extraordinary power. They were back to, the kingmakers of the legislature with their 2 seats. Now that the NDP have their 1-seat majority, how does that change the influence of the Greens? And are the NDP, David Eby has said he's still talking to the Greens. How's the dynamic of that negotiation, those discussions change, do you think?
Yeah, so it's a shift. I think, assuming that the NDP doesn't get a speaker from the Conservatives, which it seems like that is not happening from the statements that we got this week from that caucus, they still need the Greens to pass legislation. So an NDP speaker can still vote for confidence measures. So the Greens don't have the power to bring the government down, but they do require their votes to pass new laws and new amendments. And I also think, to have a little bit more cushion in the legislature is probably something that's appealing to the government. So the Greens, I would say, have influence, but not still that hard power. So they're having constructive negotiations on what that looks like, what the Greens can get. We've heard the Premier talk favorably about some Green initiatives like the Dogwood model, which is their model for team-based community healthcare. So I still think that there's a path for the Greens to get some of their initiatives done. And I think, sort of on a softer side, I think there's an appeal. And we've heard the Premier talk about this too, about a progressive majority with the margin so tight between the NDP and the Conservatives. The Greens got 166,000 votes. They can add a lot of legitimacy to a progressive agenda that I think will be appealing. And so they do still have clout. And I think, there's a silver lining for them compared to a pure minority government where they're not always going to have this heat of when are you going to take the government down, or what's it going to take for you to take the government down. I think that really hung over the Greens' head previously in 2017 2015 to 2020, where, if it was Site C approval or LNG, there was a lot of pressure for them to bring the government down. This gives them that breathing space that Allie talked about. They've got 2 new MLAs where they can sort of rebuild the party, figure out what the next chapter is for them politically, and not have to always kind of be living on a knife's edge like they were last time around.
That's a great point, actually. I hadn't thought of that until you said it, but it does put them in almost the best of 2 worlds, in the sense that they don't have the federal NDP problem of criticizing a government they could bring down at any moment, but they do have the influence within the margins to get a lot of things simply for the security of the legislatures. And it's kind of a win-win for the Greens, Allie. Now that Jillian has said that, I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The Greens are in a really good position, and that's why we keep Jillian around, because she's the smartest of us
That's
all.
That's true. I'm learning things in real time. I should pretend that I know these, but no.
What this means, I think, politically, though, is, we saw the NDP right before the election capitulate to a lot of the right side of the political spectrum with the axe and the carbon tax, with vaccine mandates for healthcare workers being removed. And so, again, this is a scenario where the NDP, some will say compromise. I will say they're kind of stuck in that I don't think that we're ever going to see David Eby and what his true governance style will actually be and what he actually wants to do, because he's reserved and pulled back a little bit by that strong opposition, that the Greens being that balance of a vote. And so it's going to be an interesting thing to see in the next year of what is David Eby's runway versus where he's capitulating because he needs to stay in power for a little while.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what do you think? Let's bring you in.
Well, I think the word you're looking for is pivot, not the C word, but pivot. I would
to clarify, what is the C word? Just so that, for the CRTC and other purposes here.
It starts with a C, rhymes with capitulate. But I'm told from media training to never repeat the negative, so I won't do that. I think there's some potential really good speakers out there. I think Rob Botterill from Saanich North in the Islands, a legal background, work in the public service. He'd be a great speaker. And how about Ian Payton? One of the things that you want the speaker to be is a good host, and he could bring all of Delta South's farm bounty to the legislature, profile it, and to global dignitaries who come to visit the legislature. Now, in the unlikely event that neither of those folks steps forward to be speaker, the Greens do play an important role in the legislative assembly. They don't have hard power, and the NDP can do an awful lot so long as they get on the omnibus. So you make the budget bill into a lot more about the budget, and you try and drive through all sorts of legislation that way, which is what former NDP folks would say is the death of democracy, and you shouldn't do. So different times, different approaches. I think Jillian is right.
Are you telling me that the NDP used to criticize something and now is going to use that to their advantage?
I would never say that. I would never say that. But the Greens play an important role here for the government. The government is wise to talk with them because there's all sorts of things that could happen over the next 4 years. Yes, they'll want the Greens to support them on initiatives so they don't get into the omnibus situation. People get sick. MLAs get sick. MLAs get enticed to run in municipal politics. MLAs get sick and tired of working in the legislative assembly. MLAs have life events that just make them look at their priorities and decide to do something different. And sometimes in our parliament, because there's two people makes a party, and we saw this with BC United. Two people step away in the party, the government loses a majority, and then you got the new progressive Democratic People's Front of whatever the Monty Python reference is there. So it's the Greens still have an important role to play, and they're wise to put Sonia Furstenau out in front on that, and the government is wise to seek their support.
Jeff, staying with you on the speaker, let's assume the NDP have to name their own speaker. What does the legislature look like in that scenario, in the sense that the speaker breaks the tie votes by convention, and it's not a law, it's just convention. Speakers typically break tie votes to continue more debate to try and get a parliament to find a consensus, but they can break them on party lines, and the NDP might be in that scenario. Does anyone any care? Does that do anything to our institution? Obviously not an optimal situation, but still workable, I suppose, for the government?
It's not optimal. I think it is workable. I think they'll take some heat from constitutional professors and political scientists. And at the end of the day, if they do have the speaker break a tie in favor of the government on an important piece of legislation, I think government will take the hit and do that, because it's not procedural perfection. It's a legislature that people at home care about. They want to see a government that's taking action on, you talk. Talking about what are practical things the government can do that's like taking the tolls off the bridges. Why don't you just build 10 schools in Surrey? Just go to Surrey and build 10 schools because kids are in portables there and Surrey voted against you. Or why don't you declare war on ER closures and take steps to make it so that not a single ER closes in the province, and you can do that through emergency orders and all sorts of stuff that would probably piss off doctors and health workers, but would demonstrate the government's on the side of people. So they may take some heat on the procedural front, but I think the imperative to act and show progress is what they will prioritize, and they'll take the hit on the procedural stuff to get action if that's the direction they indeed go.
Allie, any opinion on the speaker issue? And also the premier has said he's going to bring the House back once the judicial recounts are over and he's got a cabinet in place. Is there a point in the House coming back for what he said will be a not legislative session? What does that do? What's the purpose, do we think, of the NDP bringing the House back to do that before Christmas? And is the speaker an issue?
Well, politically, I think that the importance of coming back before the end of the new year is to really create a bit of a narrative of what those priorities might be if they take our advice here of pinpointing a couple of things versus trying to be everything for everyone, which was some criticism of how they performed during the campaign. So that might be a good thing for the NDP to kind of bring back the legislature to do that. On the speaker front, I've received a lot of questions about, well, why won't the Conservatives just put someone up for the betterment of our province?
Yeah, why won't you?
The answer is no, guys. You see what I mean? See what I'm dealing with? Well, the answer is no. We're not going to give this to the NDP. And that's, Jeff's kind of brought up a couple of names that would be good for the roles. I don't doubt that Peter Millibar and Ian Payton and a few other Conservative MLAs would be good for the position. But we also need them and their attention in our Conservative caucus as well. Just because, I take a look at Peter Millibar and he has all of this experience being in a senior position when he was under BC United. And so we're not going to help the NDP. We need to make sure that we are in a good place for the next 4 years in a strong opposition.
Let's talk a little bit about the issue of cooperation in the House. And I just want to go around, and for those watching on YouTube, we'll have more extended conversation about this in the audio podcast. But the cooperation issue, the Premier has talked about reaching out to parts of the province that didn't elect New Democrats, including a lot of Surrey now, most of northern and interior British Columbia, and cooperating with folks, except what he's called a bright line on people he won't talk to. And we're sort of wrestling a little bit with what that might mean. He's mentioned Brent Chapman. We've talked about him on the show, Surrey South MLA, comments, abhorrent comments about Muslims that came out in the election. What do we make of David Eby's bright line on cooperation, what it means, what the implications are, and any actual willingness, I guess, from the NDP to cooperate in parts of the province that haven't elected them, Jillian?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this was like a key message to come out this week. I think, one thing that I haven't seen mentioned in the coverage is that this is a line that John Restad himself did identify that he would draw with his own candidates, that racism and hate was a line in the sand for him that he wouldn't cross. And then he didn't disqualify these folks when it was revealed that they were in fact those things. So I think that that's probably where the NDP is coming from, trying to work on Restad's leadership and his hypocrisy, and sort of plant the seeds of that kind of, political, trouble within the Conservative caucus. I also think, the NDP is a party that has had a lot of initiatives for, combating hate and anti-racism. This is a really important thing for them as a party. And I think they feel a lot of responsibility to stand up for people that are affected by this kind of hateful thinking. Practically for the constituents of these MLAs that were elected, I guess it kind of depends where they are. Brent Chapman's in Surrey. There's lots of other Surrey MLAs to work with. I think it's a little bit easier in places like that. In other parts of the province, depending on, who makes this no contact list, maybe it's a little bit more complicated. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, how they can make inroads with those communities and deliver for them. Typically MLAs, it's your role to advocate on behalf of your constituents to get things done in your community and bring their voices forward in Victoria. So they're going to have to find another means of doing that if they're not going to work with the MLA.
Mm-hmm. We're going to leave it on a cliffhanger here because we are out of time. So Jeff and Allie, we're going to get your opinions on this, but you got to get on the audio podcast. We're going to have a larger discussion about this. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for listening and watching. Make sure you subscribe to our social media feeds and the show. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.